everyone, my name is Charlie and today is the first day of Victober. It is the 1st of October and thus the month has begun, the month in which we read Victorian literature. We celebrate Victorian literature. This is an annual read along that is hosted by Katie of Books and Things, Kate Howe, Marissa of Blatantly Bookish, Roz of Scandally Dandling About the Books, and many others. Go to the hosts' videos and look at them, because if you want me to remember 10 people's names when I can't even remember the majority of people in my family, you have got another thing coming entirely. I have decided to completely flout the advice that I received from my Victober TBR that I uploaded last week, in which I asked whether people thought that I should read both Barnaby Rudge and Little Dorrit or prioritise one over the other. The consensus seemed to be do what I said I would do last year and head towards Little Dorrit, but as I have famously said many times on this channel, I am ever the contrarian, and last Friday, having recorded that TBR and uploaded it, my enthusiasm for Barnaby Rudge was such that I am now 15 chapters in. Can I tell you what Barnaby Rudge is about? Not really. 123 pages in, I'm not really sure what's going on. I am seeing some regular tropes of Dickens fiction within here, of parents not necessarily getting on with their children, of Mrs. Varden. Mrs. Varden is the character who's a bit like the, was it the Bishop's wife out of the Barsetshire Chronicles, who you're just hoping they get stricken by some melody, because goodness me, is she the harridan. But then I think that that would probably make her one of the standout Dickens characters, because she at the moment is one of the only ones that I can think of. Maybe it's just not got into the plot yet. There has been this talk of murder, and an issue that I've had is that at the beginning of this book there is a list of characters, and I don't usually refer to these lists. However, because I was getting confused as to who was who based on people having very similar names and who was the son and who was the parent and that sort of thing, I thought, right, let's just go to this character list. And in the character list, it tells you everything that's going to happen to the characters. So I'm reading this with the knowledge of, although I don't know how they're going to get there, I know the character's fate. So that's been a bit disappointing. I don't know whether it's in every edition or just this Wordsworth edition, but I wish I'd known that was something to look out for. Another thing that I've actually read about with this book is that, similar to The Old Curiosity Shop, it was one of those that was serialised in Master Humphrey's Clock, a journal that Dickens was putting out in the hopes that other writers would all come together, and this Master Humphrey was going to be keeping all these different manuscripts within his clock. So that's why the first few chapters of The Old Curiosity Shop are supposedly from the perspective of Master Humphrey telling the story, and then he leaves you alone, because it was always supposed to be short stories that Dickens chose to expand into a novel. And with Barnaby Rudge, I found out that this was also serialised in there. I think that it's only the 2 novels. And I also think that this is Dickens' 5th novel. And I'm reading some criticism of Dickens' earlier works as well at the moment. And I'm not sure whether I fall into the same categories. So some people said that they felt like this had a bit of an odd tone, and the tone shifted many times within the book, and sometimes will go from gothic to romantic. I think that there are definitely gothic moments in here. You know, we have the tales of murder, and we have the big manor house, and we've got the ghostly white hands that Joe Willett has just seen when he's been to visit on his way to London. But I feel like that adds an atmosphere and a character to the tale. Something that I've liked about this book is the Maypole Inn, and the way that it has felt a bit like a cornerstone of the book and allows the reader to ground themselves. And it makes sense as to why all these other characters are getting to know one another, because it's an inn and the way that they might all interweave with each other. So I'm liking that. And I know that we are going to get this talk of the Gordon riots, which take place. I was reading this one for the historical prompts. In my 2 sittings of reading this book, I've read 120 pages. So if I keep doing like 60 pages at a time, it's going to take me like 10 days to finish. But I don't know how I'm going to fare reading the 2 chapters of Hester per day, simply because I have Poems and Pints this evening. So I get home from work, get ready to go straight back out again, and then I'm not home until near 11 o'clock. So there probably won't be much done of reading Hester, but also I'm not really the type of reader who can get away with just reading 2 chapters a day unless those chapters are huge. Like, if those 2 chapters were going to take me to page 100, then maybe I could do that. So I might leave that until Sunday and just read a great chunk of it then. But we will see. I also this morning discovered my letters of Charlotte Bronte, which I think my friend Charlie sent to me, and I do kind of want to read them, so I might add them onto my TBR. It's a relatively short book anyway, and I might not read all of the letters this month, but I would like to read a few because, yeah, I think it would just be a nice way to get some idea of what was going on around the time of Charlotte Bronte and who she was communicating with. I already know there's apparently letters to Harriet Martineau in there, and I mean to read one of her books one day. Anyway, I have a few minutes before my volunteers get here, so I'd like to read another chapter of 2 of Barnaby Rudge and then get on with the day. I've been awake since 4 o'clock, so I'm a bit more caffeinated than I would usually be at this time of day. It's my own fault. Work sent me a training video yesterday and it proved quite inspiring, which I did not expect from a training video. But hey, maybe that's the way they're supposed to go. Anyway, I will see you when I see you with further updates. There are still worse places than the temple on a sultry day for basking in the sun or resting idly in the shade. There is yet a drowsiness in its courts and a dreamy dullness in its trees and gardens. Those who pace its lanes and squares may yet hear the echoes of their footsteps on the sounding stones and read upon its gates, in passing from the tumult of the Strand or Fleet Street, who enters here leaves noise behind. There is still the plash of falling water in fair Fountain Court, and there are yet nooks and corners where dun-haunted students may look down from their dusty garrets on a vagrant ray of sunlight patching the shade of the tall houses, and seldom troubled to reflect a passing stranger's form. There is yet, in the temple, something of a clerkly, monkish atmosphere which public offices of law have not disturbed and even legal firms have failed to scare away. In summertime, its pumps suggest to thirsty idlers springs cooler and more sparkling and deeper than other wells, and as they trace the spillings of full pitchers on the heated ground, they snuff the freshness and sighing cast sad looks towards the Thames, and think of baths and boats, and saunter on despondent. It's Friday, and I have decided that I am spending the day at home. I believe the universe might be telling me to do so. I've had a lot of pain in my foot for a few weeks now, and I kept walking on it thinking that the right thing to do is keep exercising, and apparently that could be to the detriment. So today we're going to be resting it, and I'm fine with that because it is persisting down with rain. And I think that it is one of those days for hunkering down and reading a book, probably a hefty tome, and I think that Barnaby Rudge suits that. I started this book last Friday and then put it aside and didn't read anything of it until Wednesday, and since Wednesday I have only managed to read 140 pages, and that comes from, as I said, the fact that I had a really busy Wednesday. After I finished work, I was rushing home to then go to Poems and Pints, which was a great evening, and I got to share 2 poems, one of which was quite subpar and I really rattled off quite quickly and needs a lot of work, and the other that I actually had taken time to work on. And so really I didn't get anything read of Barnaby Rudge until yesterday, when I decided to listen to the audiobook as I walked into town, and I chose some really atmospheric chapters to walk into town with. My plan had been to walk to town and then read the book in a coffee shop, which has been one of the ways that I like to spend an hour before attending the writers group. But somehow I ended up a bit late, so I didn't do that. Today, having not read as much as I wanted to, I decided to follow the Pomodoro method of doing things. It helped me with my writing earlier in the year, and it's helped me with my reading too. I set a timer for 25 minutes. I read for those 25 minutes, step aside, maybe make a drink, play a game of chess, and then go back to the book. And one of the reasons I've been steering clear of like reading so much as well is because I worried this book was slowing me down, and then I found out that I basically read it at the same pace as I read modern fiction. So it's not me, it's just the length of the book. I am now at the point in this one where it's about to skip ahead 5 years, and it feels very much like Act 1 of a play with the way that the story has been going. There have been a lot of revelations in the last 140 pages. Chapter 15 has, as I say, this really atmospheric gothic start, and one of the things with this book that I talked about on Wednesday was people talking about disparity in tone in the rather romantic tales surrounding Dolly and Joe and the other two people whose names are failing me now, Edward Chester and Emma Haredale, who are in a bit of like an almost Romeo and Juliet situation of warring families. And I mentioned the play because the final act of this first act has felt very much like a play of the sinister characters hiding in corners and appearing where you wouldn't expect them, of them becoming more open with their evil, whereas in the first 100 pages it felt very subdued. It felt very much like, well, there could be touches of villainy here, whereas in the final few chapters where it's felt like the climax of another novel, like these, if Dickens was writing a tragedy with here, this would have been a very sad, bleak ending and a way to end things with page 260. Because all of our good characters have fled. They've disappeared for reasons, and the villains have really won at the end of the first act. The uncle and the father of the young couple in love have got their way. John Willett hadn't really wanted what happened to Joe to happen to Joe, but Joe's disappearing, and something's happened with Barnaby and his mother. And so I'm like, what's going to happen in this interim period? Now we're moving on 5 years. What are we about to see? It's, you know, it's something we see in fiction many times. Dickens novels are renowned for spanning a great length of time. But where are we going to see these characters in 5 years? Is the first third of this book simply a primer to the rest of the novel? Are things going to ramp up a bit? I don't know. I'm very much enjoying my experience of reading Barnaby Rudge, more than I thought I would, given that I first read the start of this book years ago, and then last year thought that the beginning of this book was a bit drab, really, and it's the reason that I didn't choose it as the next Dickens that I would read. And now I've pushed aside all my plans and gone with this one, and I feel like it's suiting my sensibilities. I think this also helps, given the book that I read before this that I really enjoyed, The Little Friend by Donna Tartt, which had all of these grotesque characters in, and I found that book reminiscent of Dickens, and it made me want to read Dickens. And then going to this, I think it was the right move for me. Having not known much about this book before has also meant that I haven't felt that that anxiety of, will this book match up to the hype that it's got in my mind, because I really knew nothing about this book going in, and I'm very much enjoying that. I am enjoying the characters, I'm enjoying the descriptions. Dickens has some fantastic descriptions within these pages, some very quotable moments. There's a lot in here about parents being at war with their children. There's also, you know, parents who are very much in love with their children and would do anything for them, and it's this disparity really that I'm finding interesting and wondering why Dickens chose to explore that in this book, and also what he says about the love of a mother over the love of a father, and also reputation. There is a lot about reputation in here too. I am thoroughly enjoying this and hope that it continues down this vein. So my plan is to read as much of this book as I can today. I have a hope as to where I could get to. I want to finish it on Sunday and then try and get through some more of the other titles that I have next week before I go to Whitby, because I don't know whether I'll be reading much when I get there. but I won't say where I want to get to in case I don't get there, as has happened before, and then just end up thoroughly disappointed in myself tomorrow. But for now, that's me, and I may see you tomorrow to talk about how I'm getting on. It's Saturday, and I'm in something of a rush because I'm madly late due to the fact that it is my sister's hen do today, and so I was getting my mother ready and all together for that, and then we got a phone call to say that the new pickup that my father just brought, I should say second-hand pickup, that I warned him against, has broken down whilst he is on his way to take a load of sheep to the market. And so we've had to get my sister's fiance to drive over to him. And yeah, so my intention to come here this morning and read some Barnaby Rudge hasn't happened and isn't likely to, because my manager's going to be here any moment now. Still, I did get halfway through the book yesterday. When it moves on 5 years into the future, or just 5 years from where it was, it does start introducing all these new characters, and it is a bit like a reset, as though it's the same world but different inhabitants. And a few characters that we met in the first 280 pages have started to reappear, and it is all getting into these Gordon riots now. It's a funny one because I'm noticing it was definitely foreshadowed within the first near 300 pages, but not knowing enough about the Gordon riots and everything surrounding that, I didn't realise what we were heading towards with these things that Mrs. Varden was going on about. And you're hearing about who the Protestant characters are and how mention of that within the first 280 pages is important to where we're going over the second half of the book. Very intrigued by this one, very much enjoying it. There are parts that are incredibly pacey, and then there are parts where it slows down and it gives you a bit of the historical context, and I'm not necessarily a fan of those bits, but I don't think that you're going to read everything, you know, I mean, there are many books out there where you'll read every single page and every single line is going to be beauteous prose that you can't help but exult. That's not the case here. There are some very plainly written bits that don't fill me with this awe that Dickens usually does, and I still favour the gothic parts in this. The first scene of this second part, where it's an incredibly stormy night on the 19th of March and Solomon Daisy is talking about seeing a ghost in the house of where a man was murdered. That sort of thing I'm very much enjoying. It's when we get into the historical bit, but I'm enjoying the blend. I know apparently people have been critical in the past of the way that these two books, this book feels like two books in one and all these different things, but I'm enjoying it. I don't understand why it's called Barnaby Rudge, but he's not really got the biggest main part in here. I think it could have easily had a different title, but I am looking forward to reading some more today and hopefully finishing it tomorrow. Barnaby's enjoyments were to walk and run and leap till he was tired, then to lie down in the long grass or by the growing corn or in the shade of some tall tree, looking upward at the light clouds as they floated over the blue surface of the sky, and listening to the lark as she poured out her brilliant song. There were wild flowers to pluck, the bright red poppy, the gentle harebell, the cowslip and the rose. There were birds to watch, fish, ants, worms, hares or rabbits as they darted across the distant pathway in the wood and so were gone. Millions of living things to have an interest in and lie in wait for and clap hands and shout in memory of when they had disappeared. In default of these, or when they wearied, there was the merry sunlight to hunt out as it crept in aslant through leaves and boughs of trees and hid far down, deep, deep in hollow places, like a silver pool, where nodding branches seemed to bathe and sport, sweet scents of summer air breathing over fields of beans or clover, the perfume of wet leaves or moss, the life of waving trees and shadows always changing. When these or any of them tired, or in excess of pleasing tempted him to shut his eyes, there was slumber in the midst of all these soft delights, with the gentle wind murmuring like music in his ears, and everything around melting into one delicious dream. I have finished reading Barnaby Rudge, and for my conclusion, I will have to say there are likely to be spoilers in this final section. If there have not been spoilers already, then they might just abound now. To begin with, I will say that I might have found a new favourite in Barnaby Rudge. I know that this is not the case for many people. Indeed, having now read the introduction to the book, I can see that it had its naysayers at the time, just as it had as many people enjoying it. I think that it has proven to be an incredibly timely book, given everything going on in politics at the moment in Britain, given the way that certain people are being set up on certain people and the rhetoric surrounding certain issues is being discussed in not just the media but online within certain political parties. It felt like this book was almost a precursor to that, a sign of things to come. When you read the introduction to Barnaby Rudge, in this edition it is by Cedric Watts, then you can garner more information about the Gordon riots. And from the little that I can gather, these came at a time when Catholic people had been given a few more legal freedoms that they hadn't had for a while, and this caused some uproar among the Protestants. That's one of the reasons within Barnaby Rudge that we have a group of people going around screaming "No Popery." I think these things seemed quite synonymous with what is currently going on in Britain, and it felt like all of the riots that are happening within this book's pages, all of the very angry men, all of the people that are feeling like they have been trodden upon and they feel like people who they don't believe are deserving of certain rights and liberties above them are being given them. And because of this, I don't know if I would care for this book as much as I currently do had I not been reading it at the time in which I'm reading it. I think everything going on around me meant that Barnaby Rudge just struck a nerve more than it might have done otherwise. Aside from that, I think that Dickens has some very beautiful prose within here. That's why within this vlog you will have heard me reciting some passages from it. I very much enjoyed reading this, but also listening to some of the audiobook. The narrator of the audiobook, who I believe was Jason Watkins, just did it in such a fashion that every character had their own individual voice, and it definitely brought the narrative to life. But for the most part, I did prefer to read the book, read the words from the page. I think that it has been such a long time since I read a Dickens novel that returning to that voice meant that I went through it rather quickly, because I was so thrilled to be back with this writer whose words inspire wonder to me as a reader and as a writer. I very much preferred this book after the page 280 point, when we skip ahead. After the 5-year point, it felt like there was more cohesion and that we were actually following the plot now. Prior to that, it had felt like Dickens was very much finding his footing, and when you consider the history of this novel, you can begin to understand it. Something I commented upon when I was first talking about this book is that I didn't understand why it was called Barnaby Rudge, given that the character features very sparingly throughout the book's pages. And I have discovered in the beginning of the introduction that apparently it was initially intended to be entitled Gabriel Varden, the Locksmith of London, and was planned a few years before the book began being written and being serialised. I'm not sure what caused Dickens to change the title to Barnaby Rudge. I don't know whether he wished for the title character to be one who is very innocent and gets dragged into these schemes through no fault of his own. I think that Dickens manages to write about riots and extremely reprehensible things in a very magnificent, beautiful fashion. So even though terrible things are happening, it was like, but this is beautiful. It's a beautifully done tale of tragic events. The besiegers, being now in complete possession of the house, spread themselves over it from garret to cellar and plied their demon labours fiercely. While some small parties kindled bonfires underneath the windows, others broke up the furniture and cast the fragments down to feed the flames below. Where the apertures in the wall, windows no longer, were large enough, they threw out tables, chests of drawers, beds, mirrors, pictures, and flung them whole into the fire, while every fresh addition to the blazing masses was received with shouts and howls and yells, which added new and dismal terrors to the conflagration. Those who had axes and had spent their fury on the movables chopped and tore down the doors and window frames, broke up the flooring, hewed away the rafters, and buried men who lingered in the upper rooms in heaps of ruins. Some searched the drawers, the chests, the boxes, writing desks and closets for jewels, plate and money, while others, less mindful of gain and more mad for destruction, cast their whole contents to the courtyard without examination, and called to those below to heap them on the blaze. Men who had been into the cellars and had staved the casks rushed to and fro stark mad, setting fire to all they saw, often to the dresses of their own friends, and kindling the building in so many parts that some had no time for escape, and were seen with drooping hands and blackened faces, hanging senseless on the windowsills to which they had crawled, until they were sucked and drawn into the burning gulf. The more the fire crackled and raged, the wilder and more cruel the men grew. As though moving in that element, they became fiends, and changed their earthly nature for the qualities that give delight in hell. I think you have very grotesque characters, but also with certain characters by the end of the book, you're understanding of their motives, whereas with some of the villainous characters, they feel like villains just for the sake of being villains. There is an almost pantomime quality to certain events with Simon Tappertit, when Dolly is speaking to somebody else in the locksmith's place and he slides out of the darkness, and that felt very much like the end of an act in a play, and indeed it felt like that because of the point in which we were reading it before it moved ahead 5 years. I think the character of Barnaby is very representative of innocence, as I say, and I think that his character adds an almost light-hearted quality to the book. He is very appreciative of nature and loves nothing more than just going out for a walk in the countryside. And one of the saddest parts in this book for me is when his mother decides they have to flee back to London after 5 years, and one of the dogs that he has become friendly with comes for the morning play like they usually have, and he sends him on his way and gets very upset about the idea that those dogs are going to come back scratching at the door looking for him and he's not going to be there. That was very upsetting to me, the abandoning of the canines. There were awful moments in this book. When the maypole is destroyed, it felt very much like when the command centre in Power Rangers was destroyed. It felt like the cornerstone of this narrative, the thing that had been grounding everybody, was gone. And seeing the destruction of these buildings that had felt like characters themselves was awful to read, but really drove home the terror that people must have felt during the Gordon riots. When it comes to the end of this novel, I think it ends as one would expect any Dickens novel to end. Anyone who's read Dickens before knows that sometimes there is a bit of a twist that can help lead things to a happier ending than usual. And there was a certain character change with the character of Dolly that I was a bit like, I don't understand this. You seem like the type of person who hasn't had much character throughout the entirety of the book. But I think, hasn't that been a criticism of Dickens' female characters for a while? I don't know, but Dolly doesn't really seem to do anything but sit around being beautiful and having some horrible things happen to her by the villainous Hugh, and like tons of other villainous men by the end of it. And then when we reach the end, suddenly she declares her love for somebody who has been missing for the majority of the last 400 pages. And indeed, we don't really get much idea of who they are as a character anymore. They've been gone for 400 pages, they've come back missing an arm, and suddenly Dolly's like, all right then, I'll have you. It just kind of felt like a huge character change for the pair of them that just seemed to come out of nowhere. This has been a really great reading experience with this Dickens novel. My friend Charlie commented about the fact that I stormed through this one and read it rather quickly, and I have to say it is the fastest I have read a Dickens. When it came to Our Mutual Friend, I listened to the entirety of that book in one day, but I know that I couldn't necessarily try and read that one in one day. Barnaby Rudge is one where when I wasn't reading it, I wanted to be, and when I wasn't getting to read it, I was getting annoyed that I wasn't getting to read it. It is a great piece of fiction, and as I say, it is incredibly timely. It has Dickens' grotesque characters, it has some small sense of redemption with other characters, and then it has some real proper villains. It has some darkness within there that you can expect from this author, as well as having some brilliant moments of light and touches of comedy, which I think that Dickens is one of the only writers who's able to do that well, is when you're in the midst of a huge tragedy and something really awful happening, he's able to find that gallows humour. And I don't say that ironically. I think that it is a very great thing within craft that he's able to do that some authors just aren't able to do as naturally as he does it. So I am thrilled to have thrown everything out of the window, plans-wise, with my Dickens reading, to read Barnaby Rudge, because it proved right for me. I'm not saying that it is the most perfect novel. I'm not saying it's the most perfect Dickens novel, but it has become a favourite of mine within all of the Dickens that I have read. I would certainly place it above certain books, although I have to agree with some writers and readers and reviewers who've discussed the fact that in the beginning it seems that we're going to be discussing a murder mystery, and then that kind of just disappears for us to talk about the Gordon riots. I don't mind that. I wonder whether that was just a bit of a shocking introduction to bring us into the tale and discuss corruption that is rife within the world at the time. I don't know why Dickens did it. Maybe he thought the book was going to go in a different direction than it did in the end. We have to remember the whole Master Humphrey's clock thing, and something similar happened with the Old Curiosity Shop, where we're with this character for 4 chapters and then he leaves you to disappear and write the book in the third person. I don't know, but if you haven't read Barnaby Rudge yet, and you've been wary of doing so because you've heard some pretty bad things and how it might be one of Dickens' worst, I disagree with that. Personally, I think that's going to be Oliver Twist, and I still haven't got there yet, but I'm certain that when I get to Oliver Twist, I'm not going to like it. But Barnaby Rudge, I am pleasantly surprised. Indeed, I am thrilled to have read it, and I hope that you do too. And that is the first week of Victober over. I am not quite sure what I'm going to be reading next, but I'm sure that there will be a vlog about it. So what I will say is that if you've read Barnaby Rudge and would like to discuss it, then please feel free to do so in the comments. If you've got any further information about anything within that book, then please share that too. I hope that you have enjoyed this video, because until next time, that is all.